Hello, I'm Papa Pete. Thanks for coming back. The Corps of Discovery got back in the water on the upstream side of Great Falls, Montana. I got back on the road and followed them. I had been nervously monitoring weather forecasts for signs of snow in the mountains. Well, it was not long before I started seeing signs of snow with my own eyes. I even found this little snowman at my first stop. This is Tower Rock, a name coined by Meriwether Lewis, though it had been used as a reference point by generations of natives before him. It marks a transition between the Great Plains and the foothills of the Rockies. The Missouri continues to narrow as it winds its way between the hills. Let's take a minute to talk about this remarkable young woman. Sacagawea was her Shoshone name. She was from a Shoshone clan in the Rockies. The Hidatsa captured her as a young girl in a raid near her home ground and brought her back to their home ground near Fort Mandan. They called her Sacagawea. Lewis and Clark met her a few years later at Fort Mandan. They asked her to join the Corps because they hoped she could help guide them and work with the Shoshone to get horses. A couple hundred miles upstream of Tower Rock is the spot where Sacagawea had been captured. This is Three Forks, where three smaller rivers come together to form the Missouri. Here, the fence runs upstream along the Madison River, the center fork. Now we turn to the Jefferson River, the right fork that they followed up to the mountains. Let's head downstream along Jefferson plus Madison. In the distance, the Missouri heads downstream in the narrow valley near the center. Just before that narrow valley, the Gallatin River, the left fork, joins the combined river. Here's upstream on the Gallatin in isolated splendor. I followed the Corps as they started up the Jefferson River. Somewhere around here, Lewis and a few soldiers went ahead on foot. They wanted to find a pass through the mountains and make contact with local natives. Clark and the others continued by boat. For many weeks, the Corps had been using smaller boats like this dugout. Clark assumed they were being watched by wary locals. He put Sacagawea and her baby near the front of their small flotilla to send the message that their intentions were peaceful. They were all greatly relieved when Sacagawea said she recognized Beaverhead Rock, another major landmark and confirmation that they were close to her home. Here it is from the water's edge. At this point, the river is called Beaverhead River. Meanwhile, Lewis found the pass and made contact with the Shoshone. He returned to the eastern side with the Shoshone chief, the rest of his clan, and some horses. They set up camp at the bottom of this hill, which has since been inundated by a reservoir, and waited for Clark to catch up. Clark arrived a day or so later. There was a joyful reunion when Sacagawea realized the Shoshone chief was her brother. Let's head up toward the pass. I tried to visualize it from the perspective of Lewis, seeing it for the first time. It was already late in the day, but the weather was good. The next day's forecast was iffy, so I decided to go for it. Most of the way, it was a gentle uphill slope. Here's the view from the top, looking back east. Lewis expected to see similar gently rolling hills on the western side. Looking south, this road runs almost on top of the Continental Divide. This is on the same road looking north. To Lewis's disappointment, to the west, there was nothing but huge, steep mountains as far as the eye could see. To my surprise, the road down on the Idaho side actually went up and into the snow. It kept going up for several miles. Just when I thought I was descending, I went back up again. Eventually, I emerged from the woods and descended into grassland, passing the spot where Lewis first unfurled the American flag. I spent the night in Salmon, Idaho. I had planned to take 3 days to make the trip from Great Falls to Salmon. My misgivings about the weather drove me to do it in one very long day. The next day, I went to the Sacagawea Interpretive, Cultural, and Educational Center in Salmon, where I learned how to pronounce her name. Somewhere near this spot on the Lemhi River, Lewis and Clark had their first taste of Pacific salmon. The Lemhi empties into the Salmon River, which Lewis and Clark hoped they could just follow down to the Columbia River and the Pacific Ocean. But the river had to be gentle enough that they could paddle back up the river on their return trip. Clark took a few soldiers down the river to find out. Here is the exact spot where he concluded it was not possible. He nicknamed it the River of No Return and rejoined the rest of the group. They all continued north on horseback. They needed to exit the Salmon River watershed and enter the Bitterroot River watershed. Their Shoshone guide got lost, but eventually led them over the ridge somewhere near this spot on the Idaho-Montana border. To be clear, we're still on the Pacific side of the Continental Divide. They got their first look at the Bitterroot near this bucolic spot called Ross's Hole at the village of Sula. They followed the river downstream, still going north, for another 70 miles, finally arriving at another well-known native reference point that Lewis dubbed Traveler's Rest. I was ready for a rest myself and stayed in nearby Missoula, Montana. Part of the Montana-Idaho border runs along the Continental Divide, including at Lemhi Pass, where Lewis and Clark crossed on their journey west. But most of it does not, including the one we just talked about. In our next episode, we'll cross that border for a third and final time and head downhill to the Pacific. Until then, so long from Papa Pete.